really enjoyed it. What I want to know is about you. I want to talk about, because the filming of this, it was a 15-year journey. And I want to know the type of person that spends 15 years on a project. So a bit of background on you would be great.
I've been making documentaries in Australia for, I don't know, 30 years. And then before that, I was an investigative journalist here, and then went into filmmaking, sort of went behind the camera. And then I went and did an MA at the film school in Australia. And when I was there, that's when I did a short film about Richard Leplastrier and decided I wanted to make a longer film. So I went and saw him and said, I want to film you designing and building a house. And this was before Grand Designs had ever started. But because it was a biography of someone, I wanted to show their process and not just, the finished product, because then it sort of is like a show reel. Then they did this and then they did that. So I thought it would be really interesting to capture Richard's process. So I went and asked him if I could make a film about him, and he said, "Oh, why don't you make a film about me for the rest of my life?" And I went, I'm not sure about that. Because he was already an older man then. Well, he was 65, but he had children he didn't have his children until he was in his 50s.
Yeah.
So he was aware that he wanted to create a legacy for them, I think, too.
And you were obviously happy to go along with that?
I didn't know it was going to take 15 years. So I filmed that house, and then I thought, look, Richard's such an amazing person with an amazing life. And I don't think many of us in our lives can pinpoint like he can, those mentors in his life and influences and things. Ours are we get things from everywhere. And so I just thought he was a really interesting person to explore as a character as much as an architect.
Yeah. I mean, as a writer myself, I look at some of the houses that, he created in this documentary, and I think, if only, I'd write my masterpiece if I could just be in that spot. I mean, they're just incredible. And but then after watching all this incredible work and everything, I was a little bit blindsided to hear, and later in the doco, that he probably isn't as celebrated or known as you would expect. And I'm wondering why, and whether that was a part of what motivated you to really tell his story.
I mean, Richard sort of shied away from media. He just thinks it's a waste of time, and a lot of self-promotion goes on. He won't put up his houses for architectural awards in Australia, because he thinks that you should be selected. You shouldn't have to nominate yourself, like promote yourself for that award. So he doesn't agree with that process. So he hasn't, he has a gold medal in Australia for architecture, but that's it really. So he's quite private, and I just think he thinks it's a waste of time. And so that was another reason why I had to be careful with him, and probably that it took 15 years just to wrangle him in a way.
So he wanted something a bit more personal.
No, I think
this wasn't.
Sorry, I was just lucky that I got to know Richard through, and he 100% trusts me. And so that's probably why it was great to have a long process, that I could, by the end of it, I just sort of hold out my radio mic and sort of like hand it to him to put on. And he only found the mute button on that radio mic to in the last. So I think it was a good process to let someone really into that, to let me into his life. It doesn't happen very often in that way.
Well, his life and the life of his partner and children, who we see very young playing on a bed, and then as adults.
I know, they sort of grow up in front of the camera. And so I was lucky that, I became part of their sort of extended family in a way. I think only one of the sons asked me, only about a year ago or something, you're going, are you making a film on our father? So I think they just sort of didn't really, it wasn't like I sort of duped them or anything, but I don't know if they understood what was happening in the early days. They were kids just playing and things.
Yeah, well, you would have just melted into the background in many ways, in terms of as far as being a filmmaker, which is ideal for a documentary maker, isn't it?
Yeah, and I decided that I was going to shoot it myself. I mean, because I knew it was going to take a long time. And when I first started, I never really picked up a camera. I sort of came from the school of filmmaking where you hired all your crew and everything. And I think what you lose in the sort of technical prowess is what you gain in that intimacy. And as you say, just sort of being one of the crowd. And it's not, oh, here the filmmakers are today, sort of thing. I think it's really useful.
Definitely. Well, so you end up with 100 hours of footage, and I once had to edit 24 hours of footage, and that was tough. So how did you manage that process, and what were you looking for, and did a different Richard emerge out of it all?
I don't think a different Richard emerged, but I didn't actually, like probably all good filmmakers, I didn't know how the film or document, I didn't know how the film really was going to end, and I didn't really know those main themes when I started making the film. So it was only in the last few years that I sort of narrowed in on particular points of Richard's architecture or who he was. So when we edited the house, which was 70 hours in the film, that you go through, you follow a house at a place called Blackheath that's the one that's being designed and created, and so I think there was 70 hours from that house alone.
Whoa.
Because you don't know when you're filming what's going to happen, who's going to say, or suddenly he's going to start talking about something interesting, or so you just, when you're shooting observationally, you have to shoot a lot of material. And then you just really go through it and pick out the good bits. And that's why they say in documentary that a film is made in the edit suite, particularly in documentaries, because as you say, we could have gone you can go anywhere. And so you really rely on your editor too as being a good storyteller. And also they're, like in any film, an editor's not invested in your rushes. Like they didn't know that shot took 4 days to make, and, you nearly had a divorce over it or something. The investment, or, and so to them it's just a shot and probably not a good one, and they want to cut out. And you're going, but I spent so much time doing that. And so that's why, what do you have a really good editor for?
No, it was fantastic. It's great. So we have questions here. So were there false horizons along the way when you thought you were done, but then something happened to keep the process going? So, yeah, I guess, yeah.
That's a good question, because when I look at my log of all the times when I filmed, the dates, I didn't film in 2016, I can see on that log. And I think then I started to feel bogged down. And with so much stuff, and where was this story going? And then I think I then employed one of our best documentary cameramen, and sort of zeroed in a bit more on Richard's personal life, and got myself out of that morass. But I think that happens in any creative process.
Yeah. And how did Richard, did he change for you over the course of filming? Know what I mean? Like, just like in terms of what he was able to give you, do you think? You did say you had that pre-existing relationship, so.
I think towards the end, he became more vested in the film too. So he knew, and as he gets older, he's 80, I think his time's valuable for him and himself too. He's not a person to just waste a lot of time. So, and he knew himself that he wanted to film him sailing. He knows that, the important parts of his life that we hadn't done. And he was trying, in some ways, I suppose people do when you become that close. He was trying to direct the film sometimes towards the end, like when we did the sailing, and he goes, well, what's your plan? And we're all going, because documentaries usually, we don't have plans. We just do it on the fly, seat of our pants half the time. And so he goes, I think we should sail, up around 6 sort of peninsulas and out the heads. And, we got around 1 peninsula in the whole day. He just thinks there's this big magnum opus that's happening, magnum opus.
So, how has it been received? Because the architectural community is that's an audience, isn't it? That's a worldwide audience, and so how was he received around the world? And what kind of feedback have you got from various audiences?
Um, Look, Richard's considered one of the best architectural teachers in the world, like really. He's a very generous person and he's a very positive and warm person. He never criticizes anyone. He's a fantastic, beautiful teacher. So he's got a big following around the world. He does master classes all through Africa, South America, Europe, everywhere, in New Zealand, with another architect called Peter Stutchbury. So, sorry, what was your question again?
I've forgotten myself. Well, all the other. Oh, I don't know about the architects. Yeah, architects around the world. Yeah, how it was responded to, and other audiences as well.
Yeah. Oh, look, people, I think because the film got released during the pandemic, people found it, I know in Australia too, they found it really inspiring because seeing someone who lives close to nature, they don't, you know, they haven't got frou-frou in their lives. There's not a lot of consumerism and things. And so I think it had a resonance for people. They found it inspiring. They found it very positive. They found it very calm. I mean, that's what his architecture's like too, but just watching the film. So that was the Australian audiences. But I mean, the responses from architects have been amazing. I mean, some of them have written and said, I've just had this film on rotation. It's totally changed the way I approach my work. I'm rethinking everything. And these are people I've never met. They're just architects who write to me out of the blue and say this. And they're quite accomplished architects.
Well, having the film on loop, I can understand why, because he does drop a lot of pearls of wisdom along the way. Like I wrote one down, The Relentless Pursuit of Pure Purpose. You know? I thought that was just wonderful. And the other thing, like as a writer, and I write comedy often when I'm writing for comedians, it's like a tailoring a suit or something to fit them. They might not necessarily be my jokes or my viewpoint. And there was a interview in the documentary where an architect did talk about his ability to see the character approaching him who's asking for a house to be designed. I thought that was really fascinating and sort of links architecture to, I mean, a lot of people would know this anyway, but to the whole artistic process, we're sort of all linked by that idea in a way. You know, we're all tailors.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, in filmmaking, actually, in architecture, there's actually a lot of crossover. And a lot of architects would have been filmmakers and vice versa. I think because it uses your left and right side of your brain, maybe, I don't know, the creative and the technical side. And so people sort of cross over like that.
Well, the other thing I noticed, there was one where he was describing the experience in a house, and he could have been directing a camera shot, like on a track or something. He goes, you walk past this happens, then this comes into view, you know, like, I mean, that could have been like a tracking shot. So it really is about the experience of seeing what emerges as you move through the space, very much like directing a film.
Yeah, I know. As I said, I think the process is quite similar. And also Richard hints towards the end of the film, I think it's in Sailing, saying that to be a good architect, you have to be a good observer, you know, of everything, light, sounds, you know, everything, the wind, all sorts of things, the environment, the landscape, people, the character of people. And so that's a little bit like an artist or a documentary maker, that you're always observing what's going on around you. And yeah.
I loved what he had to say about glass and how he doesn't like it.
I know, and I've actually, this is not my own home I'm in at the moment. I'm renovating, and my house is near the sea, and it's all a bit, you know, everything rattles and everything. Whereas the house I'm staying in is probably a newer house which everyone has these days. It's got all that double glazing or triple glazing. And so I noticed as soon as I close the doors, it's totally silent. I haven't really sort of, you know, because my own house is a bit noisy itself. So I hadn't noticed that, how most people live these days, in these sort of hermetically sealed, silent rooms.
And how he said it, he made the comment that it really does things to color, like it decolorizes your place in a way as well, having glass. Yeah, and of course Australia, I mean, where he's living, it's like there's a symphony happening in the bush. and he's really allowing that in.
Yeah, he says in the documentary, and I don't know if he could do it in New Zealand, that, you know, his life and the way we live is sort of more like a Pacific style of living, type of living. Um, but I don't think you could live without glass in New Zealand, probably, could you? Might be a bit cold.
Mm, yeah, might be tougher. I mean, there could be some areas where you could do it, but yeah, I mean, it would you'd have your moments, definitely. So, a question here: will you use any of the footage that didn't make it into the cut?
I mean, I'd
Return?
love to do that, especially for architecture. You know, I've got Richard in Kyoto explaining how the whole layout of Kyoto starts from that one tatami mat and things
Mm,
like that, and explaining it all. And so there are a lot of gems in there that I probably should mine one day.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. But after going through 100 hours of footage, you probably want a little break.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So,
um, oh, here we are. Let's move to rap.
yeah. So, so what are you working on now? Anything
Well,
else?
funnily enough, I don't know why it's happening in my life at the moment. Where it's a film I've been working on for 3 or 4 years. It's about the Bowraville murders. It's the murders of 3 Aboriginal children 30 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And it sort of really speaks at the moment because of all the Black Lives Matter and the, you know, injustice and the racial injustice and things. So we're just getting that film going and finished.
So 3 years. So you're embedding with the community and stuff.
Yeah,
It
and
sounds
they've
like you're
gone
really.
to, it's a big case in Australia. They've overturned double jeopardy laws. They've gone to the High Court to try to get the man who murdered the children in jail, but they can't
Mm,
get him convicted. So yeah,
Oh
big
well, best of luck
problem.
with that. That sounds like a great project.
Yeah.
And one that needs to be seen.
Mm.
And yeah, maybe. Well, hopefully we'll do this again over that.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. No worries at all. Mm.